Welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to start with a little bit of a discussion around Coco Gauff, who recently made a coaching switch and brought on biomechanics expert Gavin MacMillan to really focus on her serve. And this, her serve has been sort of a strength and a weakness at times for her, where there's certainly been moments where it's been a real strength and she's won a lot of free points from it, and has led her to some of the success that she's had in her young career. But there's also been times, especially of recent, where her serve has let her down in different ways, and it's led to a lot of double faults. And in the media, it's really been framed as a technical issue, which again is connected to her bringing on a biomechanics expert to really work on her technique and really break it down in that sort of way. Somebody who also worked with Sabalenka and has worked with pitchers and different sorts of people. So in this episode, we're going to talk about double faulting, talk about the serve and talk about double faulting, talk about whether it is indeed just a physical challenge, or whether it's fully mental, or whether maybe it's somewhere in between, and there's a little bit of each that are connected, that connect to the serve and double faulting. So yeah, we will dive into some of the different pieces of both her situation and double faulting and serving in general in this episode.
So before we get into that a little bit, let's take a moment to mention our sponsor, Go Sport. As a listener of the Tennis IQ podcast, you can get 10% off Go Sport products at gosport.com. So that's GEAU sport.com by using the discount code TennisIQ10. So visit gosport.com. Be sure to check out their selection of premium gear bags for tennis and pickleball. Josh and I both use their bags, and we love them. They're fantastic. So again, use the discount code TennisIQ10 to get 10% off all products at gosport.com. So Josh, as you said, the narrative in the media has been really around this being a technical issue, which feels a little bit reductive to me, like an oversimplification. But I also think it is consistent with the sort of tennis and sport coaching world that chooses to see everything through the lens of what they know. And what they know is technique, biomechanics, etc. Kind of physical sport performance. But I do feel like it's an oversimplification. I would not say that double faults per se are 100% mental. Maybe they could be. But I think just like everything in life, in sports psychology, we often talk about taking a psychosocial approach to everything we do. What does that mean? So bio means we're taking into account the biology of the athlete, of the player, and that might be tension level, relaxation level, energy level. The psycho part is, really from the neck up. What are we thinking? How are we feeling? Are we managing emotions? A lot of the things that we talk about here. And then the social part is all of the inputs that you're getting from around you. So none of the things that we experience in sport performance are, simply, oh, that's a biology problem or a technical problem, or that's just a psychology problem, or that's just a, focus and social problem. It's a combination. We're not just tennis players. We're human beings. We want to make sure we're looking at that full spectrum of everything that is going on. And so, when I saw the news that Matt Daly had been, let go, and then Gavin was brought on, I just thought, oh, that's interesting. Of course, the timing is interesting as well. That might put a little bit more pressure on the whole project of Coco's serve. But it's interesting that we're bringing somebody on who's really going to focus on the technical piece. We know that Gavin had a lot of success with Sabalenka, and he's been quoted as saying that Sabalenka's issues were purely technical, where I think Sabalenka was kind of insisting it was mostly a mental problem. And so they work together. And so, when I was reading about this, Josh, it's obvious that there was more to the success with Sabalenka than just a technical change, because Sabalenka committed to the change, right? She bought into what, Gavin was talking about, that to work on this particular technique. And he had identified, at least one particular flaw that he wanted to correct there. So when we do work on a technical change, the one that you commit to, you decide to believe in, then you can start to build some repetition and confidence around that. And again, that's a combination of technique and psychology, the mental game there. So again, I just thought this was an interesting bit of news coming out that, we're hiring a biomechanical coach to look at this, alleged, I'm sure there is a lot of technique stuff going on there, and approaching it from that manner. It's very possible too, Josh, because we don't know Gavin MacMillan, that how he talks to a player may also involve, some psychological components. A lot of coaches do have some background in that, and he may be bringing that in. And I think the difference between, say, someone who's just sort of a technique person versus a biomechanical coach is that coaches who are focusing on biomechanics are generally also really trying to look for smoothness and fluidity and helping players reduce tension, have more loose, relaxed muscles, where that may not be such an obvious focus with someone who's just strictly about the technique. Because I have a relationship with another guy he is what he would consider a biomechanical coach. And he does a lot of that. It's really a lot about feel of like what the motion, the kinesthetic piece to it. It's not just like have your arm here, racket here, toss arm here. It's much more about feeling that whole flow and putting that whole chain together. So I would assume that even within Gavin MacMillan's approach, there is a little bit more going on than just purely technique. But I know we wanted to get into this because a lot of our listeners may struggle with double faults. So if that's the case, how do we approach it?
Yeah, and it's a challenge that a lot of people have, right? Whether it's junior players, whether it's adult club players, whether it's pros, right? I mean, Coco and Sabalenka are people, obviously two of the top players in the game, and they've each had matches where, and I could pull up the exact numbers, but where they've had maybe upwards of 15 or even 20 double faults in a match. And on the men's side, there are other examples. Zverev comes to mind more recently. I know there have been others, where again, top players in the world who have had matches where they've had such a considerable amount of double faults that it's, caused them to lose in total, multiple games. And it's a real challenge that I think, I would say most people have gone through it to some extent, right? I mean, I think everyone is double faulted, but I think most people have had times at least where there have been more double faults than maybe,
like a streak of double faults,
exactly,
right?
a
Two
streak.
or three, yeah.
And I think the what's important also about Coco, and then we can talk big picture, is first of all, I totally see where she's coming from, right? She's had a lot of ability and potential for a long time. She burst onto the scene at I think around 14, beating Venus and winning Grand Slam matches at such a young age, and has had a lot of hype and this perception of potential around her for such a long time, and well deserved, right? She's been a top player from a young age, and has made different changes, right? She worked with Brad Gilbert, who doesn't have a sports psych degree, but certainly approaches things in more in that vein in terms of, you know, thinking about sort of the mental component of the sport. Um, has had other coaches as well who are maybe, more general coaches where they touch on different aspects of the game, and now is going more the biomechanical route. So I think, kudos to her for being on this journey of trying to figure it out, of learning, of trying to figure it out, of figuring out different, trying different things, trying down different, pathways, seeing what works for her. So I think that's all really, really positive. But what I think we can do when it comes to double faults is we can start, sort of big picture and think about I don't want to say, what is the point of a second serve, because I think that's, obvious. But I think, we can start try to think about the connection between first serves and second serves, because I think, especially at the non-professional level, um, the way that people approach their serves, whether it be first serves or second serves, often actually leads to a lot of issues. I think that, when it comes to first serves, if we watch the pros, if we look at the percentage, they're generally at around maybe 60 to 70% of first, of made first serves. And there's a reason for that, right? They are not just going for an ace every time on their first serve. They're trying to make a high percentage of their first serves. Because if we look at, players have players win a far at any level. Players win a far larger share of their first serve points than second serve points. So the idea is if we can make a higher percent of our first serves, we're going to win more points in general, and then we don't have to rely as much on our second serve. And most players, with the exception of maybe a couple of, huge serving players, and thinking on the men's side like Petchy Pericard or O'Reilly Opelka or Ben Shelton or, a couple of other players. The vast majority of players hover right around that 50% mark on their second serve, or a bit beneath it. So the idea is at the pro level, players are making, let's say, 60 to 70% of their first serves. And then they have a second serve that's somewhere around that 50% mark that they can rely on. Where at the outside of the pro level, at the, adult club level or college level or junior level, those numbers look pretty different. Players aren't making 60 to 70% of their first serves most of the time. I would say the number, and I'm curious if you have thoughts as to what the numbers could be, but I think it often is below 50%. Um, and players aren't making that many first serves, which leads them to have to really rely on their second serve. And, I think, first of all, I think club players don't make as many of their second serves. But second of all, I think that, their success percentage, their winning percentage on second serves, I would say is lower. So we're inadvertently putting more pressure on ourselves by not making as many first serves and having to rely on that second serve when it's not as effective. So I think as sort of a starting point, we can think about that sort of interplay or connection between the first and second serve, and how, not making as many first serves by having that lower first serve percentage leads to more pressure, and, it increases the stakes on the second serve.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, in a way, the strength of your second serve and your confidence in it can be the driver of whether you double fault or you're successfully starting the point. Yes, and of course, getting more first serves in takes some of that pressure off. But if you also have a lot of trust in your second serve, then it actually makes it easier to hit your first.
Yep.
Because you have something that you can rely on. And again, if we were to watch, even at the pro level, if you watch some of the second serves that result in a double fault, you can see the tension. Now, is that a technical issue? Is that a mental issue? Or is it a little bit of both? Is it, a mental issue that is causing a breakdown in technique? Now, that's what a lot of coaches will see. They will see the symptom of this is a technical issue, without maybe necessarily recognizing that, okay, why did your technique break down in that instance? Why did you slow down your swing? Why did you let the ball drop too much? And when we reduce these to purely mental or purely physical things, we're probably not taking the right approach, where it probably is more holistic in what we want to do. So I think if we can get our second serve to be something that we really trust, and with a lot of players, they may even tell you that they don't like their second serve. They don't really believe in it. It might even be radically different than their first serve. It might just be like a tapping it over kind of thing versus, in the first serve, you might rip it or, at least have a full swing. And then the second serve tends to be more of a careful, I don't want to make a mistake kind of approach. And therefore, you might have a completely different looking second serve, or your technique is totally different. I think that's a combination, Josh. It's a mental and a physical thing going on. They're connected, and we need to take a look at it in that vein. This is why we, especially with boys and on the men's side, we teach the kick serve. The kick serve is a way for you to swing out and hit the ball with a lot of topspin so that it goes over the net and it drops in the box. It's a great way to maintain racket head speed through the motion. A slice second serve, a little bit riskier because of its lower trajectory, lower net clearance. Doesn't mean it can't be worked on or perfected. And that you can't develop some confidence in that. And I think we, with a lot of girls and women's players, we tend to see a lot of slice second serves, right? But the kick serve is a kind of a route to getting through that. But there can be such fear of mistakes. There can be such fear of the consequences of a double fault. Maybe even if you notice yourself as a perfectionist, these things can get in the way of someone really being able to get through the pressure of hitting, good second serve, or just, not wanting to double fault. So there's a lot to this, and I think it's good for you to bring up the idea of the second serve, Josh, as sort of like the under-discussed linchpin of this whole problem. Because you can't just miss your first serve and then you lose the point, right? You get two chances here. So really the key here is, all right, what do we think of our second serve? Are we practicing the technique on that? Because, I know for me, slightly different technique on the first and second serve. I use a different grip on my second serve. I'll actually move it over, make it more extreme so I can create more spin. It's a little bit less on the first serve, right? So in some ways, I'm thinking almost like a pitcher in baseball. I've got different pitches, different serves that I might be using. I think you see this, like a guy like Ben Shelton. He's somebody who thinks like a pitcher. He's got a lot of variety on what he uses, and he'll use it on the first serve and the second serve. But a lot of times you'll see him hit a big kick on that first serve. He doesn't have to bomb every single one. Give different looks. So you might have different technique for first and second serve depending on where you are, but we want to make sure that different technique is in the vein of something positive, creating something. We don't want our technique to be different on the second serve because we're being careful, and we don't want to miss. And that's sort of the There's this theory in sports psychology called ironic processing, which is where you focus more on what you don't want, right? Don't double fault. Don't hit it wide. Don't miss it in the net. And so the irony there is that we tend to do exactly what we're telling ourselves not to do. So we have to be very careful about, especially something like the serve, that we're not, introducing don't do this, don't do that kind of things. So I think, Josh, you had some thoughts around maybe some pressure training, some drills to help people around, both first and second serves.
Yeah, and I think that it is pressure training that can pressure training is one of the main suggestions that can make a big difference here, because for most players, they during practice they'll hit some second serves and they'll make them consistently. During warm-ups, they make them consistently, and then in matches where there's obviously increased pressure, um, it's where it can be more of a challenge, or it's where it can really break down. So there's things that we can do to intentionally increase pressure. There's drills at practice where players can see how many second serves they can make in a row. For example, players could even compete on that. There's even ways to simulate pressure where, I've been a part of a drill where there's, let's say, a team of people, right? A high school team or college team. The team is split in half, and players are going one at a time, just hitting one second serve, and they keep going. They keep going one after the other until somebody misses, and then everybody sprints to the net and then back to the baseline, and then you continue from there. So that's another example. We can, also do a tiebreaker or a serve where people just have one serve, or sorry, a tiebreaker or a set where people just have one serve. So which again forces you to be comfortable with a second serve because there's no backup plan. There's no other option there. So I think there's different things, there's different sort of modifications that can be made during practice to intentionally increase pressure and bring the emphasis to the second serve, to making the second serve, and especially if it's a tiebreaker or set situation, to not just making it, but to being in a place where you have to play with it, right? Okay, I'm making that second serve, but then I'm playing out the point. So I think there are different. I think there's a progression that could be done where maybe step one is, okay, I just want to hit some second serves, maybe loosen up. Step two is maybe I'm trying to see how many I can make, right? Can I make, how many in a row can it be? Or can I try to make 9 out of 10 each time, right? Can I hit 10 second serves on the do side and 10 on the ad side? And can I try to make 9 solid ones, right? Not just tapping it over, but can I try to make 9 that would be, would be solid enough for a match, right? So that could be that step. And then, maybe doing some sort of game where there is some added pressure and some sort of consequence if I miss it. And then that final step is, can I use it in some sort of simulated match experience, whether that be a tiebreak or a set, where I'm focusing on making second serves to get points started and seeing how successful I can be in that way. So I think that there are a number of drills that coaches can use, or that players can use themselves when they're trying to, make sure their second serve is solid. So I think that there's different ways that we can train the second serve and train our confidence in the second serve, which we can talk about. But pressure training, I think, is one effective option.
So, and we can use pressure training for just the serve in general. And I think one of the reasons we want to do this is, in preparing for today, I read through some studies about pressure and what it does to something like the serve. And so under practice conditions, when there's not much pressure, the serve tends to be much more accurate than when there is pressure. And so we want to expose ourselves to that a bit more. And if you are working on a technical change, it's really important that you expose that technical change to pressure. Not as opposed to I just work on the technical change in practice, just maybe hitting balls out of a basket or a cart with no real consequences there other than I'm either making it or not, and then go right into a match. You're not you're likely to struggle there because you haven't practiced with the extra pressure or consequences of missing. So I think all those drills that you mentioned are good, Josh. They could be adapted certainly to include first serves or make it about first serves. I know I described a drill in a past episode called the 6-ball drill, where essentially you as a player, you have 6 balls and you're going to step up to serve on the deuce side, get the serve in, 15 love, but now you have 5 balls. And you then have to really try to finish the game. So then maybe the second point, you're serving to the ad side, you miss your first serve. You have 4 balls. Get your second serve in, it's 30 love, but now you're down to 3. And the idea is to make sure you can finish the game and, with the 6 balls. And then you try to create a streak of games where you have finished always with 6 balls. You don't want to run out of balls. So that's one, another thing where you can be using first and second serve. And, when you watch somebody do that game for the first time, Josh, the second serve looks like they're not hitting their true second serve. So you have to, in a way, be a coach there and encourage the player. No, don't just tap it in to win the game. We're actually don't think about winning the game so much. We got to do things the right way. Do things the right way and get good at it. You'll win the game. But if you're kind of looking to just win the game, you'll learn a lot less there. I think we should also talk about, Josh, why is this important? In terms of dealing with double faults, the obvious piece is, you lose points. But when you have, a lot of double faults in a match, it can really lead to a loss of confidence in the rest of your game. Everything else sort of starts to get a little heavier. You might be so preoccupied with your serving that you're losing your focus on your game plan. So I think we've all felt this. When we don't serve well, we tend to feel it more, and it does tend to kind of move into the rest of the game, and that can really start to lead to focus issues. It can start to lead to breakdowns in your self-talk. So you start to engage more with your judgmental self than your coach's voice. It can really break down just your whole routine and rhythm while you're playing. So I think that it's an important thing to deal with as a player, is to develop the confidence in your first and second serves. And technique might be a part of it. That's okay. We're not saying that technique isn't a part of it. It could be. Certainly certain techniques might be more apt to break down under pressure, especially if you're approaching your second serve with sort of a careful attitude. That is much more likely to break down than somebody who's fully confident, has a great technique on his or her kick serve. So we just want to make sure that we are bringing in sort of the full spectrum of both technical training as well as the psychological training required to play tennis. Tennis, to me, Josh, is not primarily a skill sport. We've said this many times. It's primarily a fighting sport. And you have to have confidence in your weapons. You have to trust your weapons. Your serve is one of your weapons. Even if it's just something you're getting it in, it's something you use. And if that trust and confidence isn't there, it doesn't matter how good your technique is. It's just not going to happen for you. And so we want to make sure that we don't just see this as tennis is a purely technical sport and that if I can just have great technique, I'll win matches. We know that's not true, right? As we had Jorge Capistani on in one of our early episodes, right? The player with the better strokes does not always win. We've all been there. We've all played people who maybe supposedly their technique isn't that good, yet we lost. Okay? What does that tell you? right? Don't get so focused on technique. Of course, something like the serve, it's very much in our control, but let's combine great technique or good technique with also a great mental game, great confidence, great focus, and what we're focusing on what we're trying to do and not what we're trying to avoid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to go back because I know that you mentioned the kick serve. And yeah, I think it is important to highlight, why, right? And I think you said a little bit about this, but the height over the net and sort of the margin, right? Like the thing about topspin, and we see this with ground strokes as well. I think about Rafael Nadal's forehand as a prime example. With there are all these articles that show how many RPMs of his forehand had compared to everybody else's, right? And it allowed him to hit a shot that not all the time he would flatten it out at times, but oftentimes he would hit this big looping forehand, right? Where it would clear the net by not mere inches, but by a number of feet. And because of the topspin, it would bring the ball down into the court. It would cause the ball to drop. And it's the same thing with other players. When they hit with spin, it causes the ball to rise and then fall, which means it clears the net by more margin, by oftentimes feet rather than inches, but drop into the court. And it's the same thing with a serve, where when somebody has an effective kick serve with topspin, it you're not clearing the net by a couple of inches. Like if you look at a flat serve or a slice serve, when somebody makes it, including an effective one, the margins are slim. You have to hit it close to perfectly in order to make it, because if you're a little bit off, the ball is either going to go long or into the net. And with a kick serve, you do have a lot more margin, right? It does tend to be a little bit slower than certainly a flat serve, but when it's hit right, you have that margin so that the ball is clearing the net by enough so that you don't necessarily have to worry about hitting it as often. And with enough spin, the ball does drop. So I think it's a great option. And there's different drills. I've seen drills where people, and I've done these drills actually, where people start and you can bring a towel out on the court. You can be on your knees behind the baseline and try to make sure you're sort of brushing up and hitting serves that way. You can try to hit up and over a fence. There's different things that you can do technically, but yeah, I think it's a really good option. In terms of certain mental tools that can be used as well, and we talked about some pressure training, but um, I think that the self-talk piece, or using certain cue words, can be helpful. Okay, I'm in a match. I go for my first serve, I miss it. Okay, now it's time for a second serve, and I feel myself start to maybe tense up. Using a certain word here, like maybe it's loose, or maybe it's breathe, or maybe it's something like trust yourself, right? Some sort of simple word or phrase can really make a big difference to, first as sort of a reminder, but I think something like that can help shift your focus from don't miss, or I need to make this next serve, or uh-oh, if I lose this next point, then it's break point, or I'm going to lose the game, to telling yourself what you want to do instead. So I think keywords can be really helpful. I also think visualization, both in the moment, but also off court, can be really helpful. I think off court, it can help to sort of cement the form that you have, and help a player sort of trust their form, which is ideally where we want to be during competition. We don't want to be coaching ourselves through our form and telling ourselves, oh, do this with your elbow and this with your toss and then follow through like this. We want to be trusting the form that we have. So I think visualization can help with that trust component. And even visualizing ourselves making second serves in key moments can help give us a certain degree of confidence in some of those big moments when they come up.
For sure. I think the visualization if one can try to practice that on the court, that's a rehearsal. You're rehearsing the serve before you actually hit it. You give yourself a much better chance of making it because you've just done, in a way, a rep of the serve. You've done a practice rep in your
Yep.
mind, and that gives you a chance to do that. So I think that's great. I think also, yeah, off court, Josh, focusing more on playing points with second serves in your visualization or seeing that. Um, and in terms of the self talk, a couple of phrases that I have used that have been successful for me have been I love my second serve and just saying good energy. Because I notice in some matches, maybe I'm a little too focused on not making a mistake. And so my energy drops a bit. So I bring my focus back to something simple that I can control, a standard that I can control. And I simply try to have good energy with my legs on the serve. If I don't use my legs enough, I'm more likely to have a breakdown in the fluidity of the serve stroke. So this, even though the serve maybe appears somewhat simple, it's a really complicated thing. And it's our one chance to be fully in control of something, yet it's hard. And that should be stated with the kick serve. The kick serve is not necessarily easy to learn. You mentioned there are a lot of good videos out on YouTube that can show you the technique. Like Jeff Salzenstein, he has some very good videos, Tennis Evolution. But it takes a lot of practice. And you've got to be able to tolerate mistakes. So a few years ago, well, this is probably almost 15 years ago, I was doing some on-court coaching, and we had a combined group format for the players. So we would talk sports psych stuff, and then we'd go on the court and we'd practice some of that, and we'd have regular practice. And then one of the players there, he was just learning the kick serve, and he was working with another coach who was helping him with that kick serve. And we were both telling him, we want you to go play tournaments and really commit to the kick serve, really commit to this shot. So he'd do that. And he did it to the point, Josh, where he would double fault games away. But to his credit, he understood the long-term vision of what was happening here. And this kid was a good player. I wouldn't say, great singles player, but good. Probably I want to say when I next saw him like 4 or 5 years later, it happened to be on his college team. And UTR was probably high 9, low 10. He was not in the singles lineup, but he was in the doubles lineup. And you know why? Because his kick serve was amazing. He could kick this ball over people's shoulders almost to the point like they were having to hit overheads on it. So he was able to tolerate all these double faults, knowing that there was a long-term vision for this. And then at some point, boom, it clicked. And then this became probably his best weapon as a player. That's a challenge to do that. I give that kid full credit for being able to withstand something in tournaments that a lot of players would have just given up and gone back to the old serve, to something they're comfortable with. They would have considered that they have to win this match or whatever. But this player really he had more of a purpose-based identity. He really understood where we were going with this serve and the necessity of hitting it more and more in these matches. And yeah, maybe you have a rough period for a little bit, but if you fully commit to it, like he did, and like Sabalenka did with Gavin, MacMillan, and that technical change, look what can happen. So there's always a physical component to these things, and there's always a mental component to these things. And I think that's just something for all of us to consider as we work on our serves, and especially as we work on our second serve.
Absolutely. No, I think it's always, there always is a piece of both. And I really like that example of of that player because it shows I think it shows an important message that you and I are always trying to get across, right? It's not just about winning right now, right? Nobody likes to lose, or at least you shouldn't, right? But we can prefer to win when we're playing, but be able to keep a long-term approach about playing the right way, understanding that, trying to play in the right way leads to us being the best, working towards being the best player we can be long term. And that's the goal, right? I mean, that player, I'm sure they didn't like double faulting. I'm sure they played matches and double faulted or felt like they beat themselves in certain moments. But long term, where did that lead? It led them to be able, to their biggest weapon in their game. It led them to be able to use that serve more effectively. So I think that's, it's the key. It's like, okay, can we get to a point, and I think a lot of people are sort of on that journey of, of improving their, your second serve, which is certainly a technical and physical component as well. And then trusting it, right? Trusting what you have, continuing to try to improve it over time so that, long term, it can be something that you can really rely on and enjoy hitting, right? You don't want to be in the point where every time you have to hit a second serve, you say, uh-oh,
Hmm.
right? You want to be at that point where, just like you said with that self-talk that you use, that I love my second serve, or I enjoy hitting second serves. And to me, the difference between someone who's looking forward to that next serve that's coming up and somebody who's fearful about that second serve or about missing that next one is a huge difference.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I found when I started to say those things, Josh, that if we were to be able to track like percent of points won on first serve and second serve, I was actually winning more points on my second serve than on my first. Just because I was approaching it, like you said, more with an approach attitude of what I wanted to do. I was
Yep.
swinging at it harder. I was generating more spin, more margin. I just had more action on it. So in a way a more problematic serve for my opponents than my first serve. So I was like, oh, it's interesting that I could get there all through how I talk to myself about the serve. And so that is something for people to think about. What is the dialogue in your mind around your first serve and your second serve? Can that be improved? Most likely it can be. Can you shift it more to enjoyment, wanting to do it, believing in it, confidence in it, good energy, versus what you don't want it to do? Missing, double faulting, hitting it long or wide or in the net. The more that we can actively engage using what we call our coach's voice to really coach you through this properly, using nots or don'ts, that's bad coaching. We want to help instruct us what we want to do and how we want to enjoy it so that we feel good about going into that. And I'm sure that there's an aspect of this as well as, Coco Gauff works on her new technique and serve. And of course, we wish her well in this process. And we hope that this partnership really works out. I think the purpose for us today was to try to make sure that people understand that these things are never just about technique or just about your mental game, that there's a combination of these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.